Danny Harold Rowling, known as the Gainesville Ripper, was an American serial killer who murdered 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida over 4 days in August 1990. He later confessed to raping several of his victims, committing a triple homicide in his home city of Shreveport, Louisiana, and attempting to murder his father in May 1990. In total, Rowling confessed to killing 8 people. He was sentenced to death for 5 Gainesville murders in 1994, and he was executed by lethal injection in 2006. His killing spree inspired screenwriter Kevin Williamson to pen the script of the famous 1996 slasher film Scream. Daniel Rowling was one of 2 sons born to James Harold Rowling and Claudia Beatrice. James was a Korean War veteran in the US Navy and a Shreveport police officer. He often abused his wife and sons for frivolous things, such as breathing in a way that displeased him, and also told his son that he was unwanted from birth. In one incident, Rowling's mother went to the hospital after claiming her husband tried to make her cut herself with a razor blade. She made repeated attempts to leave her husband, but always returned shortly after. James once pulled Rowling to the ground, handcuffed him, and had police take him away because he was embarrassed by him. In another story, Rowling had a dog, but James beat the dog so often that it died in his son's arms. As a teenager and young adult, Rowling was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia and Alabama and was caught spying on a woman getting dressed. As an adult, he had trouble trying to assimilate into society and holding down a steady job. At one point, Rowling worked as a waiter at Pancho's restaurant in Bossier City, Louisiana. In August 1990, Rowling murdered 5 students, 1 student from Santa Fe College and 4 from the University of Florida, during a burglary and robbery spree in Gainesville, Florida. He mutilated his victims' bodies, decapitating one. He then posed them, sometimes using mirrors. In the early morning hours of Friday, August 24th, Rowling broke into the apartment shared by 2 university freshmen, 18-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. Finding Powell asleep on the downstairs couch, he stood over her briefly but did not wake her up, choosing instead to go up to the upstairs bedroom where Larson was also asleep. Rowling murdered Larson, first taping her mouth shut to stifle her screams, and then stabbing her to death with a K-bar knife. She died trying to fend him off. Rowling then went back downstairs, taped Powell's mouth shut, bound her wrists together behind her back, and threatened her with the knife as he cut her clothes off. He then raped her and forced her face down onto the floor, where he killed her by stabbing her 5 times in the back. After killing Powell, Rowling went back upstairs and raped Larson's corpse. He posed the bodies in sexually provocative positions and took a shower before leaving the apartment. A day later, on Saturday, August 25th, Rowling broke into the apartment of 18-year-old chemistry honours student Christina Hoyt at nearby Santa Fe College, prying open a sliding glass door with a screwdriver. Finding she was not home, he waited in the living room for her to return. At 11 a.m, Hoyt entered the apartment and was surprised by Rowling, who placed her in a chokehold. After she had been subdued, he used duct tape to gag her mouth and bind her wrists together behind her back and led her into the bedroom, where he cut the clothes from her body and raped her. As in the Powell murder, he forced her to lie face down on the bed and stabbed her in the back, rupturing her aorta. He then flipped her body over and sliced her abdomen open from her pubic bone to her breastbone. After arriving back at his campsite, Rowling could not find his wallet. Thinking he may have lost it at the murder scene, he returned there, at which time he decapitated Hoyt, posed her body in a sitting position at the edge of her bed, and placed her head on a shelf facing the corpse. He later claimed his intent was to add to the shock of whoever discovered her. By this point, the murders had attracted widespread media attention. Many students had begun taking extra precautions, such as changing their daily routines and sleeping together in groups. Because the spree was happening so early in the fall semester, some students withdrew their enrolment or transferred to other schools. Tracy Pauls, who was a 23-year-old student, was living with her roommate Manny Taboda, also 23. On Monday, August 27th, Rowling broke into her apartment by prying open their sliding glass door with the same tools he had used previously. Rowling found Taboda asleep in one of the bedrooms and killed him after a struggle. Hearing the commotion, Pauls went down the hall to Taboda's bedroom and saw Rowling. She attempted to barricade herself in the bedroom, but Rowling broke through the door. Rowling taped her mouth and wrists, cutting off her clothing, and raped her before turning her over and stabbing her 3 times in the back. Rowling posed Paul's body but left Taboda's in the same position in which he had died. With the exception of Taboda, all of the victims were petite white brunettes with brown eyes, like Rowling's mother. Although law enforcement initially had very few leads, police did identify 2 suspects. One was Edward Lewis Humphrey, a University of Florida student who had a history of mental illness and bore numerous scars on his face from a car accident. Humphrey was arrested after a physical altercation with his grandmother and held in custody for 5 months until a grand jury refused to indict him on the murder charges, citing insufficient evidence. Humphrey's photo was shown repeatedly by media outlets. Authorities publicly cleared him of all charges after Rowling's arrest. The other suspect was also later cleared. Louisiana police alerted Florida authorities to an unsolved triple murder in Shreveport on November 4th, 1989. Detectives noticed that there were similarities between the Gainesville murders and those of 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. The family had been attacked in their home as they were preparing for dinner, and afterwards Julie Grissom's body had been mutilated, cleaned, and posed. Don Maines, an investigator on the case with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, travelled to Shreveport in November 1990 because of similarities between the murders committed in Gainesville and murders committed in Shreveport. They included posing of the victims, tape residue on victims' bodies, and vinegar used to clean the body. Maines said that they had tested the body fluids from the perpetrator in Shreveport and found that this person also had type B blood. He called the match to the evidence in Gainesville a revelation in the case. Shortly after Maine's trip to Shreveport, a Shreveport resident, Cindy Jurisic, called Crime Stoppers and reported that Danny Rowling was possibly connected to the murders in both cities. 3 months earlier, in August 1990, Jurisic heard a news report about a string of murders as she travelled through the Florida Panhandle. The report made her think about Rowling, whom she had met at her Louisiana hometown church, and his possible link to the murder of the Grissoms in Shreveport. Rowling had said deeply disturbing things to both her and her then-husband, Stephen Dobbin. He'd come over every night for a while, and then one night Stephen came in and he goes, "He's got to go," Jurisic said. She also said that Dobbin told her that Rowling had told him he had a problem. "I said, 'What kind of problem?' Jurisic said. And Stephen said, 'He likes to stick knives into people.'" Jurisic said she dismissed these comments when she heard them about them because she didn't want to believe that Rowling could be responsible for the murders in Shreveport. Rowling had also told her, "One day I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." News of the Gainesville murders haunted Jurisic, so she finally contacted police in November, based on her hunch about Rowling's connection to the murders in both cities. "It would not let me rest," she said. "One day I picked up the phone, I called Crime Stoppers and I said, 'I think there's one guy y'all need to investigate, Danny Rowling.'" Investigators responded to the tip and quickly found Rowling, who had been arrested on September the 7th, 1990 for an Ocala, Florida supermarket robbery. The robbery had been committed 10 days after the bodies of Pauls and Taboda were found. Rowling was being held in the Marion County Jail 40 miles south of Gainesville. Investigators determined that Rowling had type B blood like the suspect in both the Gainesville and Shreveport murders. Once Florida investigators realised that Rowling had multiple convictions for armed robbery, they realised he could have also been responsible for the bank robbery that occurred on the day that Christina Hoyt's body was found. They returned to the evidence locker where the gun, screwdriver, bag of money and cassette player had been stored and listened to the tape. They also found tools matching marks left at the Gainesville murder scenes. The small camp where he'd been living was in a wooded area near apartment complexes frequented by students. Investigators discovered audio diaries he had made there alluding to the crimes. Later, it was discovered on August the 5th, 1990, Rowling broke into the home of Janet Frake in Sarasota, Florida. He bound and gagged her with duct tape while he sexually assaulted her, but did not kill her. In November 1991, Rowling was charged with 5 counts of murder. He was brought to trial nearly 4 years after the murders. He claimed his motive was to become a superstar, similar to Ted Bundy. In 1994, before his trial could get underway, Rowling unexpectedly pled guilty to all charges. Subsequently, State Attorney Rod Smith presented the penalty phase of the prosecution. During his trial, Court TV conducted an interview with Rowling's mother from her home, during which his father could be heard shouting off camera. On April 20th, 1994, Rowling was sentenced to death. Rowling was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. Shortly before he was executed in Florida for the series of killings in Gainesville, Rowling claimed responsibility for the Shreveport murders, handing his spiritual advisor, Reverend Mike Hudspeth, and Florida police a handwritten confession and apology. Rowling had a last meal of lobster tail. He sang a gospel hymn but made no statement immediately before his execution, which was witnessed by many of his victims' relatives. Rowling was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on October 25, 2006, after the US Supreme Court rejected a last-ditch appeal. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. EDT.
If you like that, then listen to our main show every Wednesday on all good podcast providers. It's Alive, the really fake true crime horror podcast. All the guts and gore, none of the guilt. See you on Wednesdays.